we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
We can't tell our people they can vote yes on abolishing slavery unless at the same time we can tell them that you're seeking a negotiated peace.
It's either the amendment or this Confederate peace. You cannot have both.
How many hundreds of thousands have died during your administration?
Congress must never declare equal those whom God created unequal.
Leave the Constitution alone.
We're stepped out upon the world stage now, with the fate of human dignity in our hands. Blood's been spilled to afford us this moment. Now!
Abraham Lincoln has asked us to work with him to accomplish the death of slavery.
No one's ever been loved so much by the people. Don't waste that power.
This fight is for the United States of America.
Do we choose to be born, or are we fitted to the times we're born into?
Well, I don't know about myself. You may be.
This settles the fate for all coming time, not only of the millions now in bondage, but of unborn millions to come. Shall we stop this bleeding?
There were certain things that I liked in a film about him, in that he told storytelling to make a point. That's what we do as Dakota people. Also, you know, there were a lot of times when he didn't have to raise his voice. That's a character of Dakota people. We talk, you know, in a even tone, try to, you know, in order to get your point out, you don't have to be loud. You don't have to get mad. I like that character about him.
My name is Jeff Williams with the Minnesota Civil War Commemoration Task Force. I want to thank everybody for coming out here tonight for tonight's first night showing of the film Lincoln, directed and produced by Steven Spielberg. We are at the Mall of America Theaters. First thing I want to do is say thank you to the Mall Theaters for allowing us to use the Star Bar as the for our pre-film gathering, and then also for our post-film panel discussion. And so first of all, I want to introduce our panelists for tonight. From right here from the Minnesota Civil War Commemoration Task Force is Paul Buchel. If you see our website at mncivilwar150.com, you will see his work. In the center we have Dr. David Woodard from Concordia University, St. Paul. He is the professor in the Department of History chair. And then we have, on our end, is Randal Dietrich from the Minnesota Historical Society. So I'm going to ask these three individuals a series of questions tonight, just to get their impressions and their ideas, and see what they've seen, looking through their eyes. How did they capture this film? So we're going to begin, first of all, with what is your initial impression for the film? And did it meet or exceed expectations coming in?
My initial impression of the film was that it was fantastic. I guess my expectations were pretty high, and they were exceeded beyond belief. In my opinion, this was the A-team, Spielberg and John Williams doing the music, and Tony Kushner writing, and incredible actors. It was the A-team bringing their A game. Really a fantastic movie, and I know I'm a little biased, but if you look at it from a film perspective, from an acting perspective, from a historical perspective, it was great all around, in my opinion.
I could just agree, I guess. Is this working?
I don't know.
Okay, well, we're just going through the motions. I always look at these films and try to figure out if a regular person who wasn't a Lincoln nut would want to read a book about it after they watched the movie, and they really nailed him, I think. I would get the impression that most people in there who weren't history buffs will now go out and try to read something about Lincoln. They really should, because I thought it would be hard. It's like making a movie about Jesus. I know that's sacrilegious, but it's got to be hard to do. But they did it. They got everything right, and they made him out to be the interesting person that he is.
My expectations of the film were certainly met. I think it was nicely bookended. The front and beginning of the film and the end of the film focusing on the battle scenes, which are important for the Civil War, but didn't focus on that, which I thought was a nice way to frame the story of Lincoln. It's a beautiful film about a beautiful man in many ways, and I guess kind of the takeaway that I had from it, now sitting here with you and knowing others around the state, is that it kind of reminded me at least of some sense of appreciation and awe of the people that are working so hard today to tell that story. The film does that beautifully, but realizing at the same time there are people working across the state of Minnesota, authors and artists and historians and educators that are working really hard to tell that story as well. And so it was a good reminder, I think, a beautiful reminder from an A-team of this is the story. And I'm buttressed by the idea that there's so many people out there working day in and day out in schools and high schools and colleges around the state, sharing this information with Minnesotans every single day. That, for me, was inspiring.
Thank you, gentlemen. With a film like this taking place in 1865 exclusively, what do you think has been or should have been put in? Have there been any omissions? And then also, since this was largely about the 13th Amendment, but they kept it very tightly focused on the 13th Amendment, do you think there are other areas where they should have ventured into from your backgrounds?
Oh, that's a really good question. I think the film did a great job of hinting, although it was only in 1865, it did a great job of hinting towards Gettysburg. It did a great job of hinting towards the Emancipation Proclamation or Willie's death without showing a flashback or anything like that. I think maybe it might have been nice to establish a little bit more the personal relationships that Lincoln had with Seward and with Stanton, and you didn't get to see Chase and Bates. They weren't in his cabinet at the time. But since the book was based on the team of rivals, I guess, I mean, if I had to find a criticism, which I'm loath to do, I guess that would be it. But I think they did a fantastic job where if you came in not knowing a whole lot about the era or anything like that, you heard the Gettysburg Address, you saw the relationships between President Lincoln and his wife and his children and that kind of thing, and it gave you just enough to get a sense of the relationships and everything that happened before 1865. I guess that's just how I feel.
Yeah, I don't want to make too many criticisms, I suppose. I think Mary was not very, she was kind of one-dimensional. She wasn't bad, but I don't think they made that relationship out to be very good except for a few things. One more thing that I'll add that I really liked, and I will say that I am from Springfield, Illinois, so that even gives me a little more cachet, right? The fact that when I was growing up reading about Lincoln, no one ever wanted to say what a great politician he was, because that makes him seem kind of grubby. They showed what a great politician he was, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And it took them a while. It wasn't until toward the end of the movie, but I really like that, the fact that they showed that he was a great human being and a caring human being, but he could also be a politician too.
So quickly after seeing the film, it's 2.5 hours. At least that's what I understand by reading, that it's 2.5 hours. It seemed to click right along. I could have sat for another 2.5 comfortably. I thought that it was nice that it went into the depth that it did with the 13th Amendment. I think not to go into that depth would be a disjustice or injustice. So I was appreciative they took that much time to go into something that detailed. And just other elements of the film that I thought worked well was, I think, just the time they even spent receiving the telegraphs and sending them back and forth, again, from how we understand how the world works now, to step back in time and see that communication going back and forth, and the bated breath of Grant holding his breath and Lincoln holding his as the vote was coming in, was a nice element to reveal for the public that isn't used to seeing that form of communication in that way.
And just one more thing to the film's credit. We all remember giant pieces of legislation making it through Congress. This film made it exciting, made it interesting, which I bet no other film has ever made a passing legislation through Congress interesting. So that was one other success of this film.
Okay, I'm going to start this one in reverse. I'm going to go with Randal first. Other than Daniel Day-Lewis portraying Lincoln, what other character of the movie was your favorite or you thought was spot on in their portrayal? And what other character in the movie did they get right?
Oh, that's a huge question. I think they got Thaddeus Stevens about right, and seeing the passion that he brought to it, and how he kind of controlled himself throughout the whole process would be probably the role that I think they most nailed after Daniel Day-Lewis.
Yeah, he was really good. Stevens was great, and they made him just crotchety enough, but still a good politician. And if you've read about Stevens, everyone knew that he was living with his African-American housekeeper, and they made some they looked like they wanted to get into that a little bit. I thought Fernando Wood was pretty good in his obnoxious role as the New York, as the slick New York Democrat. I wish they would have made a little bigger deal out of Nicolay and Hay. I'm a big John Hay fan because he was a diplomat at the turn of the century, and those were Lincoln's two private secretaries, and they were in the film, but they didn't. I don't think they named him, did they? They didn't talk about him a whole lot.
Secretary Seward, I thought, did a great job as the kind of the counterweight to President Lincoln, and that seemed to be his rationale, was that he wanted somebody he could argue with, and so where Seward was nervous and kind of feisty, Lincoln had his patience, and he was going to nuance the 13th Amendment through the Congress. And I also wish they added a little bit more about the relationship with Stanton, because it was similar. Stanton was so disciplined, which is exactly what the cabinet needed, what the war needed at the time, and it would have been nice to see a little more interplay between Lincoln and Stanton, as there was with Seward and Lincoln.
Okay, based upon what you've read about Lincoln's speaking style and voice, what do you think about the Daniel Day-Lewis / Spielberg version or attempt in tonight's film?
From what I understand, it was probably a generous portrayal, I would venture. So again, you see the internet buzzing with people commenting about, I think, being surprised who maybe haven't done the reading to understand Lincoln's speaking style. But I think how it was portrayed in the film, from what I understand and grasp, is that it seemed maybe generous a little bit, in giving him more presence than maybe he had at the time.
Yeah, supposedly Lincoln had a higher voice, maybe, but we're not sure. I thought he had all the other mannerisms down very well, including something so minor as his walk. He did very well in that walk, Lincoln, supposedly. When Henry Fonda played him in that 1940s movie, he tried to get that walk down, whereas with the long legs and all, and Lewis had it down really well.
The biggest thing to appreciate, we don't know exactly what he sounded like, but I think it's nice to see Lincoln not as the Monument with a booming bass voice, the Monument. It's nice to see his quirks, his idiosyncrasies, where it seems like he's not paying attention during a conversation, and all of a sudden he makes this fantastic point, because that's real. And as much as, in my opinion, as much as we might love the Monument and revere him, it makes the history, and I think it makes it so much more applicable to our life when we see how real he was, with his kind of weird walk. He looked like kind of a robot with a voice that we wouldn't really think of this great American hero, this kind of higher voice. And I think that makes it so much more you could take it in so much better as an audience member, knowing that this person was real, just like the guy sitting next to me with the wrinkles in the face and all the impurities that we have. I didn't mean...
Well, I see an accusation there, Paul.
President Lincoln's wrinkles.
All right, one quick one. I'm just going to hold the mic. We've seen Daniel Day-Lewis as portraying Lincoln. We've also had Gregory Peck, as you mentioned, Henry Fonda. So far, who is your favorite actor to portray Abraham Lincoln for all of the films that you've seen in your lifetime, long or short?
I'll give it to Daniel Day-Lewis. He's won 2 Best Actors. Let's win 3.
I would too. This gentleman mentioned Hal Holbrook, though. He did a good job, but Lewis is great.
Yeah, I'd go along with that. Definitely.
All right. Daniel Day-Lewis it is. Okay, so now getting a little bit more seriously here, based upon what we've seen or what we haven't seen in the Minnesota State Legislature and in Congress in Washington for the past 4 years, what parallels can you draw between what's going on in our modern day and what you saw in the Lincoln film in the House of Representatives?
Oh, I get first on this one? I don't know. Well, they number one, they actually passed something, and even though they were criticizing each other and saying, I mean, you love the words they used. They give some great words, but they at least passed something. But I mean, you can't help but making the leap between the end of slavery and having an African American president. Now, it's important to note that Lincoln did so much to get all of this started, and we have a whole different society today, and it may be different, especially when you see Alexander Stephens and those people sitting there talking about how they got to keep their slaves and they want to keep that same system up. And I actually saw more parallels between Stephens and some of those Southerners and certain other people today, not mentioning any group of people, but certain people today who want to keep things the same way.
What was the question? Well, I think one of the things that comes out of it is big legislation like that, and amendments are messy. Is something that the film certainly shows, and we know from recent history is also a messy process. And as far as how people kind of talk to each other across the aisle, I'm always taken back to the actual museum in Springfield, where you have that gallery of cartoon caricatures done by the media of Lincoln and portraying him as a baboon and other things. And for me, that was very striking to see that in real time and in a real kind of way, to see how people were portrayed back then and draw parallels today, that it's just not that bad today as it was that many years ago.
I know one thing that came out of the Minnesota elections especially was this kind of frustration with not a lot getting done, this lack of moderates, this lack of statesmanship, and things are getting bogged down. Bills aren't being passed. We're having shutdowns. And maybe the biggest takeaway for the leaders in this state is to have Lincoln, who nuanced it. He worked with radicals, literally called radical Republicans at the time, but also conservatives with them. He worked with so many different viewpoints and steered the ship through all of it. And I think that can be illustrative to our leaders now to try and get things done. It may be hard with Twitter, and you're always trying to score political points, and you don't have a lot of time before the next election and money, and but sometimes statesmanship comes first.
In a movie about Lincoln, there could have been many, many, many facets of his life that were discussed about. Why do you think Spielberg chose to make at about the 13th Amendment in 1865, instead of going with the younger Lincoln or the Lincoln congressman when he was fighting over the spot resolutions with the Mexican-American War, and yet he chooses the end of his life in the 13th Amendment. Why do you think he did that?
I think because it was harder. I think a lot of other films have gone after the battles with the cannons and things that can easily attract an audience. Nowadays, it is... I think it would attract an audience to see a different time when things were very divided, when people were angry at each other, they were fighting. Politics was higher than it's ever been, and I think Spielberg took it on because it's really hard, like I said before, to make passing legislation interesting, and it was also an aspect that was not. I don't believe was ever previously discussed about Abraham Lincoln. What was his political genius and the nuanced way he managed legislation. So I think he took it on because he knew it was a challenge, but he knew there was an appetite in the American audience to see that at least at one point somebody got things done to Washington, and that somebody achieved something higher, and maybe not the most glamorous way, but the country was better for it.
Yeah, I think he wanted to show his political genius, as I said earlier, because most of his youth has been talked about before. And I also think that Spielberg probably understood that we would sympathize and understand this topic a little better. Diversity, race, and we did. I thought it went over very well and would go over very well with the public nowadays.
I don't know why he would have. I mean, I think the points that were made are good ones. Certainly an area that deserves more exploration. He did that beautifully. You should stamp on the beginning of any video, like, spoiler alert, because we've been talking all about aspects of the film. So do warning for people viewing the video, at least, if that's the plan. And at least looking at other Spielberg films, again, that opening battle sequence, to me, it was very brief in many ways, but did have shadows, a reflection almost of Saving Private Ryan with the opening scene from that film, where you kind of get a sense of the brutality of war, and Spielberg did that with both of those films.
Okay, as we're winding down our panel discussion, I have two very short questions. First one is, were there any takeaways from this film for you? Is there anything about Lincoln that just became a dawning moment where you said, I never saw it that way before? Is there any real takeaways from this film for you, having seen it tonight?
Takeaways? I liked some of the humorous parts. I liked some of the storytelling that Lincoln did so beautifully. Did a lot to stitch the other narrative stories together, for me at least. I'd also like to think that it's almost a civic duty to kind of go out and see the film, and don't wait for it on demand or on video or something. It's something you have to see, in my mind, in the theater, on the big screen, and better yet, sitting next to other people and sharing that experience. You don't get that at home, and seeing it in the theater is a way to see it.
He didn't have a very good relationship with his oldest son, did he? That seemed very cold, but we all know, if you read about Lincoln, that he was very good with his other boys. So whatever was going on there. Can I ask you a question? Yeah. I had thought I have read before, and you know more of the military stuff than I do. I thought I'd read before there wasn't a lot of bayonets used in the war, yet in that first scene, that's what they were using. So you could comment on that.
I might as well just take that one on right now. Yes, bayonets were used. As a matter of fact, at the Battle of the Muleshoe at Spotsylvania Courthouse in May of 1864, it was 23 hours of hand-to-hand combat operations with the bayonet. So bayonets were frequently used, even though the rifles were able to shoot longer distances, were more powerful. The bayonets were still used back in the entire part of the war. As a matter of fact, the Gatling gun didn't even get in, it was invented, but it really didn't even get used by the U.S. Army until 1866, and the Navy got it in 1865. So we didn't even have what we would normally call a machine gun in today's parlance until right at the very end of the war and into the post-war years. So we were still utilizing the bayonets and a lot of the what we would now really call antiquarian tactics. They were still being used.
I guess my takeaway was the patience. It's so easy to get wrapped up in your day-to-day life, and Daniel Day-Lewis did a great job. You could almost see it in his eyes that he had patience with whether it was Mary or his political rivals or something like that. Many other some good presidents we know would lose their temper or would try and ram something through Congress, and his was. There was this patience that I think on a human level, non-political, non-historical, I don't know, this patience that for each person, that each person has a story that is important to tell. Like when he met that couple from Missouri, they had a very important story to tell, and they came all the way to Washington to meet with the President of the United States, and he was patient, and he met with them, and for them it was a big deal, and he took the time for them, and I guess just on a human level, that's something that I need to remind myself of.
Okay, as we wrap up our panel discussion, this last question is a two-parter. Thankfully, they're both short. One, was this film accurate based upon what you have read about the subject matter beforehand? And two, would you recommend it to somebody else, and why?
It's as accurate as I've read. Now, it's based on the book Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin, which is what I, in the past, have used as the standard of accuracy, so but I would absolutely recommend it. It seemed as though every character had read 20 biographies of the person they were portraying and brought in the subtleties of that character. So you learn so much about the era and the Civil War, not just President Lincoln, just by seeing this film. So I'd absolutely recommend it to fans of theater, fans of acting, film, the law, anything. I'd definitely recommend it.
Yeah, I would too, and I would also say that if anybody's interested in other books about Lincoln, we sometimes forget some of the older biographies that are still very good. Benjamin Thomas's biography that he wrote in the 1940s is still very good, as is David Donnell's book from the early 90s, and Stephen B. Oates' book from the 80s. So Doris Kearns Goodwin's is a great book too, but some of the older biographies are still worth looking at.
Yeah, I mean, I found it to be historically accurate from what I understand, and again, would certainly encourage people of all ages to really see the film. I mean, it should be an audience that is a wide audience in way of ages that can enjoy it and learn something from it.
So at the Mall of America Theater Star Bar, November 16th, 2012. This is Jeff Williams of the Minnesota Civil War Commemoration Task Force, asking everybody here to give our panelists a big, warm thank you applause. And then we also want to remind people, our viewers on the internet at mncivilwar150.com, to make sure you get on out and see the film Lincoln. I think it's one that you're not going to regret.
My initial impression of the movie Lincoln is, quite frankly, it's probably the single best depiction I've seen of Abraham Lincoln. And my initial impression is still lingering. It's still there. I'm going to see the movie a second time, and I really look forward to just sitting back and listening to Daniel Day-Lewis's voice. I thought he embodied Lincoln as I always sort of imagined he would be. And I want to catch some of the nuances of the performance, but quite frankly, I'm just still sort of numb. I thought it was wonderfully, wonderfully done. I think some of my favorite scenes are the quieter scenes where we see Lincoln in the telegraph office, scenes where he's thinking. You can just see him thinking. The body language that Daniel Day-Lewis used to evoke this sort of these moments in time where Lincoln is wrestling with issues, just beautifully done. I really got what I think was a taste of how truly canny he could be, and there were moments, particularly towards the end of the film, when a hard edge came through, And that was actually refreshing to see. And it hinted at really how complex a human being Lincoln must have been. The casting in this movie was just wonderful. I'd have to say, hands down, my favorite in the supporting cast, without a doubt, is Tommy Lee Jones as Thaddeus Stevens. Just wonderful. And somebody about which I really know very little. And quite frankly, I want to know more about him now. Once again, he just really sort of whetted my appetite to know more about the actual historical figure. To see Blair coming through with the magnificent Hal Holbrook once again, just great casting, another complex figure. And then James Spader as, I believe, Bilbo, somebody about which I know virtually nothing. I really need to know more about this character now. I would agree with some who would like to know a little more, would like to have seen more of Nicolay and Hay coming through, but quite frankly, just phenomenal. I'm still somewhat awestruck right now. Overall, I really liked what I saw. I think they were rather particular when it came to casting and costuming. I may be one of the people who actually could have done without the opening battle sequence, although I know we needed something to hint at the brutality of war. But I thought it was all very effectively done. But I loved some of the period details, the way things appeared to be obviously illuminated with candlelight, firelight, daylight. Very well done there. The scenes in the telegraph office were wonderful. The wires, the sounds, the clicking, and the scenes with the House of Representatives, once again, just wonderful. Never seen it ever done quite like that before. Great beards, great faces, great hats. I didn't like the fact that it was only about 2.5 hours long. I could have taken another half hour or more. And as I said before, I could have maybe done without the opening battle sequence. I think maybe more of a tableau of the bodies on the battlefield would have sufficed to do that. It still would have hinted at the brutality of war, but really, I'm not kidding when I say I wish it had been a little bit longer. I understand that the average viewer maybe would not want to sit through 3 hours worth of a movie of this type, but I would have taken a lot more. I think this is an invaluable glimpse into a very, very contentious time in our nation's past. It should be required viewing, quite frankly. I really do. I think our legislators should have to see it. I think the citizens of this country would be well served by watching this movie. And those who love movies will be blown away by it anyhow. It's simply beautifully photographed, wonderfully acted, and it's really something that is going to stay with me for a long time.